Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Anna Baker's wedding dress. In 1836, a man named Elias Baker purchased a mansion in Altoona, Pennsylvania and moved his small family in. Elias's oldest daughter was named Anna, and when she fell in love with a steel worker, things took a dark turn. Anna's father didn't want her dating this man, but she kept doing it in secret. The story goes that Anna and the man planned a secret wedding and were going to elope. Unfortunately, Elias found out and freaked out. He apparently purchased the steel mill that the man worked for and then forced him to have to move to an entirely different city so as to prevent him from being able to continue seeing Anna. Anna, of course, was furious with her father, and I'm sure this was only made worse by his decision to offer other men to her, to which she of course declined because that's just weird. Anna instead locked herself in a room with her wedding dress that she never got to wear. Anna unfortunately never married after that and spent the rest of her life being terribly upset about the whole incident. After her death, it is said that her anger and despair ended up going into the wedding dress. Members of the Baker family reported seeing the dress in different places around the house, despite no one moving it themselves. Some have even reported seeing Anna's spirit dressed in the gown around the house as well. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Golden Eagle. This car was a 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, and it has been blamed for the death of around 14 people, which, how do we even let it get that out of control? It is said that the car started out as a police car originally, but there were 3 officers assigned to this car who all ended up taking their lives and other people's lives in horrible ways. Not in the car, but still super weird that this all seemed to happen after they had been using the cars for work. Because of this strange correlation, it ended up being sold off to another man. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it is said that because of the rumored cursed car, it became a point of interest for vandals. People began vandalizing the car only to meet their own untimely fates, which were all met in strange ways. For example, it was said that one vandal died from being struck by lightning. It is said that the curse is so strong that one person decided to merely touch the car and it sent him into madness, as he went on to commit atrocious crimes after that I cannot even detail here on YouTube. The car now belongs to Wendy Allen, who supposedly collects and decorates haunted cars for a living, so it seems as though it's finally found its home, far, far, far away from anyone else. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Blarney Stone. For hundreds of years, the Blarney Stone has resided within Blarney Castle, which is near Cork, Ireland. The stone is a piece of limestone, and legend says that those who give the stone a smooch will then be given the gift of the gab. This little smooch can bestow the power of being able to talk your way out of any situation, which would be incredibly useful, but there are those who always try to indulge in too much of a good thing. The issues start when you attempt to take a piece of the stone, no matter how small, away from its home. Those who don't follow the rules and take the stone end up being cursed with bad luck. Every year the castle receives parcels from greedy tourists who tried their luck at stealing portions of the stone. These parcels are returned with the intention of lifting the curse of misfortune. It is said that once the stone is returned, the curse will be lifted, which is most definitely good news. So I guess the moral of this curse, however, is to not be greedy and to just follow the rules. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Terracotta Army. The Terracotta Army was discovered in China, and it is a massive piece of funerary art that is thought to be one of the most massive archaeological finds of modern times. It truly is incredible, and it's something that's been attracting tourists from all over the world since its discovery, but for those who did the discovering, well, things haven't been going so well. In 1974, there were 7 farmers who happened to stumble upon this huge discovery, and you would think that this would come with some kind of a reward, but instead, things have been going terribly for them. Soon after the discovery, the government claimed their farmland. After this, their homes were demolished in order to make way for the exhibition halls and gift shops that were to come. They didn't just get nothing for the discovery, they ended up losing because of it. This is exactly why many people believe that perhaps with the unearthing of this huge piece of art, they also dug up some sort of curse that was buried long ago. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Myrtle's Plantation Mirror. Myrtle's Plantation is located in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and it is said to be one of the most haunted places in the entire world, which seems like that would make a lot of sense. One of the reasons for this spooky reputation is because of a mirror that resides inside of it. It is said that this mirror holds the spirit of Sarah Woodruff and 2 of her children. Legend goes that a woman named Chloe was a slave slave at the plantation, and she drew up a sort of plan to get revenge on the owners of it, Sarah and her husband. Chloe baked a cake full of poison for them, but in the end, the rest of the family, except for the husband, ended up consuming the poisonous cake. When they passed away, it is said that their spirits went into the only mirror that was uncovered at the time, thus this haunted mirror was born. People who have since visited the plantation have claimed to see the family in the reflection, as well as handprints on the glass, despite the continuous polishing. In our number 5 spot today, we have tap shoes. These tap shoes were listed on eBay, and they are cute as can be. They're black shiny ones with a red bow to tie them together. They look recital ready, but apparently they haven't been used in a long time, and the reason behind it all is chilling. Legend goes that these shoes once belonged to a little girl who loved to dance. At some point, the shoes were retired, and she would go on to meet an untimely fate. The shoes ended up being placed with other old memento items and put in a closet and sort of forgotten about. The shoes, as well as the other items with it, ended up being part of an estate sale years later, but the spirit of the person who passed may have already had some other ideas about what they wanted to happen to the shoes. The seller of the shoes reported that there were mysterious happenings surrounding the shoes as they were clearing out their late aunt's house, the person who was the owner of the shoes. They explained that there were mysterious knocking sounds coming from inside of the closet, almost as if the shoes were tapping by themselves. Also, as it turns out, the house had quite a gruesome history that included killings, so if not the aunt's ghost, perhaps there's another one lurking somewhere in there. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Dark Mirror. This mirror now resides with the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, but prior to that, this mirror was received from the owner who had purchased it from a psychic fair. It is believed that this mirror was created sometime around the 1820s or 30s, and it is actually quite beautiful to look at, despite the sinister things it seems to hold. The owner who gave it to the museum explained that every time they peered into the mirror, they saw these extremely upsetting things while looking into the dark mirror's reflection. The museum has said that since they added the mirror to their collection, there have been guests who have also reported the same kind of things. Guests have claimed to see things reflected back at them, like sightings of their own corpse. In our number 3 spot today, we have the water jug. Okay, estate sales are weird places. There are weird things there, some quirky items, but this has got to be one of the strangest on a whole bunch of different levels. It's a decorative drinking jug, but it's being held in a miniature cart that's being pulled by a porcelain donkey. I truly could not make that item up, nor could I make up the fact that this kitschy item is also apparently haunted. The seller of this item spoke about how he grew up with the item around, as it was always displayed at his grandmother's house and that she always kept it full of water. This was all fine and dandy until after she passed away and he was taking care of the estate and he bumped into it. How was this jug filled with water when no one was there to fill it? He thought that perhaps it was just old leftover water and he just ignored it, but the same thing seemed to happen repeatedly. And it wasn't even like the water level was staying the same. It would increase, seemingly all on its own. The seller decided that this was not an item that they wanted to hold on to and decided it would be best to pass on to someone who is ready to take on this mysterious, strange object. In our number 2 spot today, we have Letta the doll. Before we really dive into this one, can we just acknowledge how all cursed dolls look like they would be a cursed doll? I mean, like Annabelle, Robert, they both totally look like dolls that would be holding a secret, scary curse. And this doll, Letta, is just another one that we can add to that list. Letta is a doll that is said to be around 200 years old and is extremely cursed. This doll is called Letta for short, as its full name is Letta Me Out. Really clever. The doll was originally found underneath a house, which definitely feels like the origin story of a haunted doll. The creepy discovery came 47 years ago. Letta still lives with the man who found him. The hauntings of Letta include things like the doll walking around on its own at night, the owners finding objects around the house that have been moved into odd places. Some people have even seen Letta move right in front of their own eyes, and the owner also reports finding little doll-sized scuff marks around the home as well. It is said that this doll once belonged to someone who passed away while holding it, thus their spirit became trapped inside of the doll. Apparently one day in an interview about Letta, as the interviewer was asking questions about the person who passed, the doll began to move in her lap. Yeah, no thank you. Letta has his own Instagram and Facebook page in case you want to hear more about all of the creepiness surrounding this cursed doll. In our number 1 spot today we have the mask. This metal mask resembles the face of a monkey. It's definitely already a little strange looking, but the story is even more interesting. According to the seller of this item, they explained that they acquired this mask in Thailand, but not before they experienced a supernatural battle where a witch used spells to bind the spirit of a jinn to the mask, trapping it in. Since then, the mask is said to be full of supernatural powers, some of which could bring benefits, but it takes a whole pile of work. This mask is said to have the ability to fend off vampires as well as potentially bring riches to its owner, but it needs some things in return. The entity in the mask needs regular offerings of food and drink, and it also requires the owner to meditate in front of it for 20 minutes 3 times a day. Talk about high maintenance. If a person refuses to do these things while in possession of the mask, it is said that a cruel fate awaits them. I mean, what do you expect when you anger an ancient spirit?
Coming in at number 10, let's just get it out of the way, we have Annabelle. Okay, so we all know that Annabelle the doll resides in the Occult Museum, so let's just honestly get her out of the way and move on. Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll that lives in a glass box because she simply can't be trusted to be unsheathed to the real world. The doll is demonically possessed by a dead child named Annabelle. Hip hip hooray. The doll has portrayed some horrifying and very evil behaviour, and the Warrens were given the doll by a student nurse who simply couldn't handle having her around anymore. Annabelle the doll was the inspiration behind the scary movies The Conjuring and Annabelle Creations, so a pretty scary plushie. Visitors at the museum are warned profusely not to even touch the glass cage that the creepy old smiling Annabelle sits in. You don't want to find out what kind of malevolence she could unleash if you break the rules. Moving on to number 9, we have a vampire coffin. It seems that the vampire coffin on display in the Occult Museum was found by the Warrens themselves and was used by a real-life modern-day vampire. But was it though? Let's take a look at it, shall we? I mean, there really is rather a lot going on here. There's a window with a creepy doll head on a plinth. Apparently the plinth is important. There's some kind of mounted devil head too, a spooky necklace, and a picture of the alleged vampire in question. And like, what is happening at the top there? Also, is the vampire who this belongs to pissed that his bed's been stolen? Like, I would be. Is he gonna come looking for it? So many questions. Coming into number 8, we have child gravestones. Okay, but like, actually what is wrong with the Warrens? I get it, Occult Museum and everything, but do we not draw the line at tombstones of children? Apparently, we do not. These wee little graves can actually be found outside the main museum, you know, just to like create a more total experience in the walk up to the building. It is said that the graves on display belong to children who were used in ritual sacrifice for satanic spells. Coming into number 7, we have the 2 deaf dolls. These dolls are a little bit different from Annabelle, as they are said to be voodoo dolls or witch dolls. Sure, they look creepy. I mean, one of them has a noose around its head for goodness sake. The other one has had its eyes gouged out, which isn't better by any means. The story behind them is even creepier, because you see, voodoo dolls are used to bring real harm to real people. The noose on the neck of one of the dolls probably indicates that someone died, and gouged out eyes, well, that isn't a great sign either. It seems that a doll collector came across these dolls and brought them home. I would leave them very much where they were. On bringing them home, she found that her son's health began deteriorating rapidly. Now it seems that some of the witch's voodoo doll magic had retained and picked the boy as its new vessel. The collector contacted the Warrens, who removed the dolls, after which the boy recovered. But the story continues. It seems that a visitor to the museum broke the rules and touched one of the dolls and was later involved in a horrifying accident. This is what happens when you touch the creepy dolls. Coming into number 6, we have shrunken heads. Okay, do you know what shrunken heads are? Because if you don't, let me break it to you. They are the real decapitated corpse heads of dead people that have been prepared as tribal trophies. Sounds great. To make a shrunken head, you have to remove the skull meticulously, and then you sew the eyes and mouth and nose shut. All of the brain matter and fat from the head is also removed. A ball is stuffed in the head to keep the shape, and then the head is boiled with water-containing tannins. Ugh. Head soup. No. The head is then dried with hot rocks and buried in sand, usually for a year. Great. So in the Occult Museum there are real decapitated heads, and these ones have been used for tribal magic rituals. There is some seriously bad juju associated with some of these heads. Coming into number 5, we have the Summoning Mirror. A classic haunted mirror. Mirrors have long been associated with the spirit world. Indeed, legends like Candyman and Bloody Mary seem to suggest that spirits can be summoned from paranormal planes using a mirror. This isn't just any mirror at the Occult Museum. Of course it isn't. This is a special conjuring mirror used to bring forth spirits and demons. The only thing is though, you don't know if what answers your call will be a good spirit or a bad spirit. To me, I have to say the mirror is pretty beautiful and lavish, like I'd like that in my bedroom, although maybe without the side of spirits popping up. They can stay out. Coming into number 4, we have the haunted organ. Who this organ belongs to, we simply don't know, but according to the Occult Museum, it starts playing itself at random intervals. Ooh. It is thought that the organ is haunted by a particularly musical spirit, and that the instrument provides a macabre soundtrack to the witching hour at the museum. On top of the organ sits all kinds of other creepy stuff, a sign which reads Restless Spirit, a hand holding a small ball, a bust of a child, a big frog, a selection of spooky owls. Honestly, wonder how the organ feels about all the clutter. Marie Kondo needs to get in, sort it out. Coming into number 3, we have a brick from the most haunted house in England. The story of the Borley Rectory is actually pretty chilling. The building was constructed in 1862 in Victorian times in Essex, and rumours of its haunting were rife from the very beginning. The building was severely damaged by a fire in 1939. Ghost hunters claim the activity is related to a Benedictine monastery built in the area in 1362. A monk was said to have been executed, and a nun bricked alive in the walls of the convent after the pair had an affair. It is thought that the nun and the monk haunt the grounds and had a hand in the fire that tore through the rectory building on the site. Before the fire, it was said the owners of the house had found human bones on the property and experienced poltergeist activity. Despite the fire rendering the building inhabitable, hauntings in the ruins continue. Now of course good old Ed and Lorraine had to go for a jaunt there, and they took a token back to the museum with them, a brick from the ruins. Was it one of the bricks that was used to keep the nun in the wall? Does it carry any of the bad energy from its horrible history? Possibly. Coming into number 2, we have the Wood Dweller. Ugh, the story behind this object honestly fills me with fear. So the story goes that the satanic idol was found in the woods by a guy who was out hunting. The man said that he walked up to the doll and had a horrible feeling. Have a listen to what the Warren Museum had to say about it.
He didn't know why. He looked at it, it was so spooky to him. He got this feeling of dread and this feeling of horror. And he said he was sitting next to it, just almost lost all his strength.
Honestly, that's terrifying. It scared a grown man, a huntsman. All of his energy was just drained, and he said he was filled with dread. Ugh. He said he turned away from the idol, and then he saw a man wearing a black cloak walking in step opposite to him. It seemed that the horned idol is used for satanic rituals for summoning evil spirits. The man did make his way out of the forest and told the Warrens about the idol. Of course, Ed and Lorraine went to seek it. Lorraine Warren was particularly affected by the piece and said that one of the demonic spirits inside the idol sent her into a catatonic state for days. She even claimed it made her levitate. Does this sound like something should be on display to the public? To me, no. Put it away. Okay, this needs to be put away. It freaked me out harder than Annabelle, and I don't know who's gonna make a movie about this, but they should. We have the heart-stopping Shadow Doll at number 1. Let's have a look at this Shadow Doll, shall we? Honestly, my eyes. Take it away. This doll is said to have been created by black magic and is comprised of human and animal bones. Hip hip hurrah. The life-size doll is labelled as a doll of shadows and hexes, and if you ever visit the museum, you should be careful not to look the doll in the eye, for it seems that it has the ability to visit you in your nightmares, giving you a fright so hard you could have a heart attack. Apparently, even so much as photographing this doll could expose you to its hex, so be careful. The Warrens say that the doll was given to them by a couple who found it in an antique store. I know, right? Who wouldn't look at this doll and think, what a beautiful vintage piece worth taking home? Obviously, just ignoring the warning signs of the doll's demonic fashion sense and the soul-sucky open mouth and the gormless eyes. Yep, the couple took it home and began experiencing terrible sleep paralysis and nightmares, and at this point, I'm thinking, who do they have to blame but themselves? The husband even woke up with scratches on his back. Who do you gift a horrible demonic doll to? The Warrens, of course.
At number 10, the Dead Book Box. Now, Do you remember that the 2012 movie The Possession was based on a true story? Well, that story was based on a debug box. Now that specific box that the movie was based on is one that now Zak Bagans has at his haunted museum. And this box is actually a wine cabinet that is allegedly haunted by a debug. And now, a debug is Yiddish for a malicious possessing spirit that people believe to be a dislocated soul of a dead person. And so it becomes trapped in an object, like this wine box, until a person helps release the spirit. Now in Bagans' box, it's believed the restless spirit can possess the living, and that's why Zak Bagans is keeping the cabinet closed, because he's a little bit scared of it himself, I would think. Now, the box was originally posted on eBay for sale by a man named Kevin Manis, who was having a ton of trouble with it. Anytime he gave it as a gift to someone, they experienced strange issues and its darkness, and it passed through the hands of others afterwards as they would each have their own unnerving experiences with the box. At Zak Bagans' museum, if you want to see the box, you must insist to see it and be 18 years of age or older and sign a liability waiver, because they're not joking around. Now, not all exhibits at the museum stay open all the time. At number 9 we have the Devil's Rocking Chair. Bagans acquired a rocking chair that was owned by the family whose stories are probably what inspired The Conjuring 3. Now, this was the Devil Made Me Do It case in the early 80s. During stories talking about David Glatzel's possession, Ed and Lorraine Warren said the rocking chair would rock on its own, levitate, and even vanish and reappear. Now, David and Lorraine also claimed to have seen the devil sitting in it, so take that as you will. Now, with all this spooky stuff in mind, Zak Bagans was just sold. He was like, I need this chair. This is, of course, though, a thing that happened on the opening night of the Devil Chair exhibit, where he was like, look at this cool chair. 5 people bawled uncontrollably and 1 woman collapsed. So, according to TMZ, just a few hours after Bagan opened the exhibit, he shut down the exhibit. But then, a couple weeks later, opened it back up, less issues. But that opening night started with a bang. But on to number 8, Jack's van. Now another thing Bagans has is Dr. Jack Kevorkian's assisted suicide van. Nicknamed Dr. Death, Kevorkian helped over 100 people with terminal illnesses end their lives during the 90s. He did his time for prison for 8 years under charges of second-degree murder and died in 2011 at the age of 83. Now, there is obviously a wide contrast in views on what took place in this van. Some see what the doctor did as monstrous and pin him as a murderer, while others paint him as an activist who wanted to make sure those who wanted to pass did so painlessly and on their own terms. Either way, heightened emotions can come to those who see the van, and fear may be one of them. And that might be one reason that Zak Bagans was like, I want this in my haunted museum. So let's go on to number 7. Another thing there, Bela Lugosi's mirror. Now this mirror has many stories attached to it, especially since its namesake comes from its connection to Bela Lugosi. And now, if that isn't ringing any bells, he is most well known for playing Dracula in the 1931 film, so quite a ways back. Now, guides of the tour at the museum say that Lugosi would use the mirror as a medium for scrying and trying to talk to his dead wife, but the truth is the only confirmed connection is that it was originally said to have once been in Bela Lugosi's house, plus none of his 5 wives died while he was married to them, and there is no documentation of him participating in the occult, but the mirror has seen some things. It was in the room when Frank Salitri was mysteriously murdered, a crime that still has not been solved. He was found bound up in the master bedroom with a single gunshot in the back of his head. So maybe those who let their minds wander while looking into this mirror fall ill when they project those ideas onto the mirror, or maybe the mirror itself has the capacity to haunt and curse those who look into it. Now, people say they've seen entities reach out to them through the mirror or have the sensation of having their necks bitten while looking into it, but nothing has been confirmed. On to number 6, John Morell's preserved thumb. And now, I don't know exactly what Zak Bagans is saying about this thumb, but it's not John Morell's. Now, he's probably basing his information off an incredulous book written by Virgil Stewart, and the backstory is, John Morell in this book is said to be an occult leader and the head of the Mystic Clan that's purpose was to steal slaves to plan an overthrowing of authority. But this book was written by Virgil Stewart, who wrote it in an attempt to get more clout after capturing John Morell, who was likely just a horse thief and a slave stealer. Now, Stewart just kind of blew the situation completely out of proportion to try to get more street cred. So while the thumb is real and a real thumb, it's not Morell's, who
probably died in prison and was buried with all of his thumbs on him. And now, that's not to say what it stands for isn't scary. People in Mississippi read the book and believed in it, believed in what Stewart was saying. In Tennessee, they knew the truth because they knew Stewart and he was just fabricating things. But in Mississippi, ooh, Nelly, they were suspicious of one another so much. The summer of 1835, people in Mississippi were killing one another and their innocent slaves on the off chance any of them was part of this mystic clan, which is a clan that didn't exist. So now you know the harm in falsifying stories, you can see how this little thumb is a creepy bugger and a symbolism of something bigger than it is. So, worth it in a way to have at the museum. Now, another scary thing at number 5, a cauldron previously owned by Ed Gein. Zak Bagans bought this cauldron at an auction and apparently it was found in a shed on the old Gein property. And if you need a refresher on who old Gein was, he was a grave robber and murderer that would experiment on human bodies, making masks of human skin to wear around the house, and he used skulls as soup bowls. So no, I'm not kidding. This was his cauldron, and okay, what's the big deal, right? It's a cauldron. Well, it turns out, according to the person who auctioned off this item, Ed Gein stored body parts and blood in this cauldron in his shed. Now, obviously, as a collector of the horrendous and haunting, Bagans decided he needed it, and now it's on display. Now, one thing is for sure, that cauldron would make some killer soup. At number 4, Charles Manson's portraits. Another thing in this haunted museum is a portrait of Charles Manson. And now, the portrait isn't just haunting due to it being of a mass murderer and cult leader. No, it's haunting because when you look into the eyes of this image, you are looking at Charles Manson. Well, in a way, you're looking at his ashes. The artist of the portrait, Ryan Almighty, used parts of Charles Manson's ashes for the eyes of this piece. And even wilder, Almighty achieved the reddish-brown hues of the piece by using his own blood as the pigment. So, this piece really is a little piece of the artist and his muse. Creepy. Now, let's go to number 3, Demon House Staircase. So you may think a staircase doesn't have much inherent scary ideas attached to it, and you're not wrong, but this staircase was a part of a whirlwind scary experience. LaToya Ammons and her 3 children allegedly underwent demonic possession in the house the stairs originated from. While living there while renting, Ammons and her children experienced possession and terrifying experiences like walking up walls, floating over a bed, and feeling choked. So, very haunting experiences. And all this escalated to the point that the Catholic Church backed up a priest who performed 3 exorcisms on Ammons. And then the family relocated for their own safety with the help of Department of Child Services, and Zak Bagans then bought the house. He was interested with the reported demonic possessions and stories and explored the house until he demolished it, thinking, better done with it. He only kept a staircase and a little bit of carpet that's sealed off in a room in his museum that's voluntary for visitors to see, and even voluntary for staff to see because of the entities associated with it. Which is very nice for the staff members. It's like, it's so spooky. It's okay, you don't have to see it. I appreciate that. But now on to number 2, a Chris Farley Polaroid. At Zak Bagans' Haunted Museum, he has this celebrity deaths room, which first of all, I think it's really weird for people to fixate on the death of someone they don't know, and I think this item I'm going to talk about is disrespectful. In the celebrity death room, there is a Polaroid of Chris Farley after his overdose that killed him. It was acquired from a police officer that was at the scene. Since I cannot and will not show that photo, just know that it was a photo of his dead body after a drug overdose that visitors have described as sickening, disgusting, shocking, and horrifying. Now, using the image of a dead person, a real person, as a gimmick is in poor taste and shows a lack of empathy on Bagans' behalf, and that scares me, so that's included on this list. On to number 1, Peggy the doll in Peggy's room. Now this one has a past. Let's talk about this doll before it got to the museum. Peggy was sent to a British paranormal investigator named Jane Harris after Peggy's previous owner was having some nightmares where the doll would haunt her dreams. That owner would wake up hot and shaken with fevers and hallucinations, and even her local priest couldn't help her out. She eventually figured it was because of Peggy the doll and sent her off to Harris. Once Jane Harris and her team had the doll, they tried to figure out what was up, and they say that Peggy is possessed by the spirit of a woman from London, born in 1946 and died of some sort of chest condition, which is very specific. Wow. Yes, that's the history, but how does Peggy haunt? Well, apparently through dreams, pushing people away from entering her room in the haunted museum, or even light bulbs going out when people mention Peggy's name. Now, people are warned not to look her in the eye because they could feel chest pains, nausea to the point of vomiting, or really bad headaches. And now this could be the spirit within the doll circumventing some of her own pain, or many coincidences lined up together. But either way, many say the scariest thing they saw on their trip to Zak Bagans' Haunted Museum was Peggy.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Old Arnold Estate. If you're a horror fan like myself, then part of you probably wants to visit this Conjuring house. I don't know, like 10% of me wants to peek in. Or Ed and Lorraine's Museum of Horrors. I think I'd rather go there. The house in the film looked a lot fancier than it did in real life. It was more cinematic and they made it look even more creepy as a property in general, but that's what happens when you have millions of dollars in your budget. You're trying to make a more memorable horror film too. Now this is the real house. It's referred to by the Perron family as the Old Arnold Estate, and it's located in Harrisville, Rhode Island. On the real property, there's a barn to the left of the house. So I have to say, the original kind of seems way scarier than the movie. I don't know, barns creep me out. A lot of spiders. Aside from paranormal horrors, the Perron family also had to deal with financial ones. When the family did live there, a pipe burst and flooded their business, so they had to sell more than 85% of their new land. Number 9, witch history. The Conjuring film, the main plot here of course is a witch named Bathsheba Sherman, and it's haunting the grounds, or the house. It's a wickedly evil spirit, and the real Bathsheba was born in 1812. She married a Rhode Islander named Judson Sherman, and they had 4 children. Also, apologies if I'm saying her name wrong, but I'm kind of okay with that. I don't want this to be like a Beetlejuice situation where she just pops up randomly and just pukes in my mouth. Herbert Sherman, her firstborn, arrived when she was 37 years old. He lived a long life as a farmer, and he grew old and all that jazz, but the other 3 children that were born afterwards, there's barely any information about them at all. Julia, Edward, or George. The mother, the witch, passed away on May 25th, 1885, 4 years after her husband did. Now there are stories that her body turned to stone when she died, or it was some sort of paranormal form of paralysis, because of course over time these stories change. It's like the longest game of broken telephone. Obviously a few things here are fake, but what the Perron family did find was the beginning of something very real. Number 8, Bathsheba's gravestone. The grave of the witch was found alarmingly close to the Perron family's new home, right on the property next door. Her resting place now is in the cemetery right across the street from the fire station near downtown Harrisville. So if you're ever visiting Rhode Island and you want to maybe, I don't know, be possessed by a witch, throw that in the GPS. Enjoy, and also, good game. They didn't initially think the strange happenings were because of a witch gravesite, obviously, that's not where their mind went to first, but that's when Ed and Lorraine were asked to help out, and they knew right away that it was, well, the witch next door. Number 7, the hauntings begin. The initial incident happened a few years before the paranormal investigators were actually called in. Carolyn, the mother, she was laying on the sofa, and then all of a sudden her leg muscle started to have a spasm. Her calf was in this immense pain. She had no idea what was happening. It was out of nowhere. Then when she looked down to the ground, she saw this puddle of blood. She got stabbed by something. It was a very small puncture. And no, if you're thinking it was a bee, it wasn't. She looked and looked for a sign, anything to hint to what just happened, and she couldn't find anything. Also, it was a perfect circle. Carolyn described it as if it was a large sewing needle that went through her skin. Ouch. And in true witchy fashion, the Perron family also had broom problems. That's right, the broom would go missing or it would move place to place. And even more strange, Carolyn would sometimes find piles of dirt in the middle of a recently cleaned kitchen. You gotta love a helping, cold, dead hand. Number 6, levitating chair. In the movie, the exorcism happens at the end, of course. It's like a happy-ish ending, but in real life, that exorcism never took place. Lorraine Warren has since said that her husband, Ed, would have never performed such a thing, nor would he try. But Andrea Perron, one of the 5 children, has come forward many, many years later, and she said that she witnessed a seance with her mother, where her mother was speaking in a different language, and she also did not sound anything like her mom. Not even close, which is terrifying. And as Andrea recalls, her mother's chair then started to levitate like it did in the movie, and then after a beat, she was launched out of the chair across the room. It wasn't just Carolyn that experienced these horrible games either. As we saw in the film adaptation, the children too were busy with their own spirits. Number 5, the music box. We had to include one of the creepiest elements of the Conjuring movie, the Perron family music box. Director James Wan wanted to use this music box in the first film because, well, mirrors and creepy tones make for great suspense, but also this was a real haunted artifact from the real house. Today the box is safely stored in the Warrens Museum alongside other items that look more or less normal upon first glance, but they're actually extremely haunted. I'll get to those in a bit. This part in the movie actually scared the out of me. Any mirror scene, I can't do it. I always eat my hoodie. They always do it so slow too. They're like I would slam it, just slam it, have toothbrushes fly out, I don't care, I'm scared. But this was real life, you can't forget that. This music box actually caused so much trouble for these poor girls. Specifically April, the youngest of the parent children. She found this antique in the house and she used it to communicate to another spirit, the spirit named Rory. Number 4, other owners. Andrea Perrin has told us that every single person who has once lived in this house, they all experienced some sort of paranormal activity. That's comforting. Some left this house screaming and running with only a few belongings. That would be me day 1. I wouldn't even make it till night. I'd be out of there by 4:30 p.m. Sharp. When the parents sold the house after all these haunting encounters, the guy who moved in then temporarily to start fixing up the house, he left too. He left without his car, he left without all of his tools, and yes, he even left without his clothing. Ghosts don't wait for you to put on pants. That's what I learned doing this. Ghosts do not wait. The current owners of the 18th century farmhouse, Corey and Jennifer Heisen, bought the home in June 2019, and yes, they've already seen stuff. You may ask, who in their right mind would move into a known haunted house? Well, paranormal investigators. That's exactly who. The scariest couple ever. They're like, oh, this is perfect. Over $1 million. They're like, debit, we'll take it. Let's get new wallpaper. So far, they've actually witnessed doors opening and closing on their own, and also loud knocks on the wall. Corey, the husband, admits to having a hard time on nights when he's all alone. He says he doesn't feel anything evil per se, but the house does feel busy. Number 3, the Warren Occult Museum. I mentioned the music box earlier, which sits now in the Warrens' creepy personal occult museum. Once belonging to the Perrin family, the music box is one of many strange artifacts. In the museum, there is a vampire coffin. Yep, you heard me. A satanic idol, the conjuring mirror. There's a shadow doll that apparently has the ability to visit your dreams and in Freddy Krueger-like fashion, stop your heart while you're asleep. And also Annabelle is in there as well, but she's got friends. Annabelle has friends. You'll be pleased to know that Annabelle is actually the least creepy of all of them. A haunted pearl necklace puts Martha Wayne to shame, right next to the haunted glass eyeballs, of course. I'd love to know more about the glass eyeballs. Let's see that movie. But one of the most fascinating items in here has to be the headless T-Rex toy. Is that from Toy Story? Is this Sid's room from Toy Story? What a crossover that would be. Number 2, other incidents. A total of 8 generations of one extended family lived and passed away in that same house, all before the arrival of the Perrin family. Andrea has been quite vocal about the happenings, and to be fair, if I had a fraction of her childhood, I wouldn't shut the up. That sounds like an insane time. I would never sleep. She also confidently states that a lot of those souls never left the house. The Black Book of Burryville, which already sounds creepy, was the town's public records book at the time, and on the property there, it stated that there were 2 hangings that took place. Poison was used in a death type scenario. There were 2 drownings, not 1 but 2, and then 4 men who were passing by just happened to freeze to death on the property. Andrea has a book, it's called House of Darkness, House of Light. So if you're curious to read up on more of these happenings, go right to the source herself and support. Finally, number 1, a photograph of Bathsheba Sherman. You always see those UFO videos and they're filmed with like a BlackBerry Curve. It's absolute trash, it's like 420p, it's horrible, not convincing at all. Not even, no zoom, no effort, just Cloverfields. There's never clear evidence of anything nowadays, but we may just have a clear photo with the real witch, Bathsheba Sherman. This photo is from the Perrin family farmhouse back when it was still the Arnold estate. This was 1885, so the witch was most likely in her 70s at the time, but still it's hard to tell, the photo is still grainy. But that's because it was 1885, right? You know, it's not a BlackBerry. This is like the world's oldest, creepiest game of Guess Who. This witch lived next door to the farm, and although we'll never really know who is who, many believe she's the lady in the middle, closest to the camera, like right over here. Also, the fact that she's wearing some sort of mask makes this grainy photo even more haunting. She's standing by herself. I feel like the vibe of that group shot was off. Like nobody wanted to stand next to the literal witch. I don't blame them. Guys, do you think the real Bathsheba Sherman is in this photo? The lady on the left looks a little bit witchy. I don't know, who am I to judge?
Starting us off at number 10, the toy monkey. So it goes without saying that almost everything that is a notable part of the Conjuring series is also a real artifact that the Warrens found along the way. One of these such artifacts, who made an appearance in both The Conjuring and the spin-off Annabelle Comes Home, is the toy monkey. However, if it wasn't already obvious, it's not something to be played with. As Ed tells the reporters in the Conjuring movie, everything you see here is either haunted, cursed, or been used in some kind of ritualistic practice. Nothing is a toy, not even the toy monkey. So what exactly makes this monkey so scary in real life? Well, allegedly, it is possessed by a terrifying demon who enjoys stalking its victims before eventually killing them. So yeah, not a very nice monkey it seems. Although, nothing you'll find in this museum is terribly friendly. Coming in at number 9, a vampire coffin. As far as creepy looking things go, I have to say this is not one of the scariest looking on the list, but of course, things are not always what they appear. This coffin found at the Warrens Museum is not just called the vampire coffin because of the slightly goofy looking Count Dracula face on the top, but because it was allegedly actually used by a modern day vampire. Now, I'm not saying that this is fictional, but I will say that the details surrounding this are rather few. There is no file stating how modern this modern vampire was, or how it came to be in their possession, but I mean, it's definitely very intriguing. My only question is, where is this so-called vampire now? Was it killed or is it roaming free? Should we be nervous that a bloodthirsty monster could be on the loose, or was it more of a Twilight vampire situation? I guess we will never know. Coming in at number 8, the famous music box. If you have seen The Conjuring, which by the way, if you haven't, you really should, then you will definitely recognize this next item here. In the film version of the story, the youngest child of the family, April, finds an antique music box in the house and uses it to communicate with the spirit of a young boy named Rory, who was supposedly killed by his mother, Bathsheba, in the 1800s. Now, of course, there are definitely larger things at play throughout the film, but at the end of it, viewers see Ed place the haunted music box inside of the room of artifacts, where it suddenly opens and begins to play its tinny music. Now, in real life, it didn't quite happen like that, but the real music box is safely tucked away in the Warrens Museum. However, legend has it that while it really does contain an evil spirit, it was not properly contained, and so some believe the demon could escape at any moment. Coming in at number 7, tombstones. When it comes to items involved in a satanic ritual, I am sure that the Warrens managed to corner that market. I mean, are there other haunted museums? Absolutely, but theirs is really the one that started it all. One of these allegedly satanically involved items you can find hiding about are a series of tombstones that the Warrens claim were used in a dark occult ritual by those who work on the darker side of the paranormal. However, what makes these tombstones especially creepy is that they reportedly belong to rather young people. And so the Warrens had reason to believe that the young people were not only used as a sacrifice, but then their tombstones were used to finalize the ritual. So, you know, just all around very dark and evil stuff. Coming in at number 6, a brick. It's not all Hollywood-based sensations inside the museum. In fact, one of their most prized and feared possessions looks about as plain as you could imagine. It's a brick, like from a house. But of course, this is no ordinary brick. It's in an occult museum after all. This brick in particular was from the Borley Rectory, a now famous building that was demolished in 1944 after it was badly damaged in a fire. But what made it such a sensation was that prior to the 1939 fire, it had long been rumored to be the most haunted building in all of the United Kingdom, which is a pretty tall order considering how many allegedly haunted buildings span across the UK. Allegedly, the night of the fire, there were over 2,000 reports of paranormal activity, including floating bricks thought to have been possessed by a poltergeist. So, if rumors are true, that would make this brick probably the most terrifying brick ever. Which, I mean, I don't know how much competition it really has there, but still, it's a demonic brick. It's terrifying no matter what. Coming in at number 5, pearls of death. While it's probably a pretty safe blanket rule that you shouldn't go around touching much of anything you find in Ed and Lorraine's demonic collection, some stuff is probably a little worse than others, and this next one falls into the latter category. Notoriously one of the most dangerous items found inside the museum, the Pearls of Death is a cursed necklace said to do exactly as the name suggests. Allegedly, anyone who dares place them around their neck will be choked and suffocated to death. Now, my question about this necklace is it like a Frodo and the Ring style situation where it will call to you, slowly infecting your brain through mind control until it practically forces you to place it around your neck? Or does it just wait for someone to unknowingly do it before it unleashes all hell on the victim? I guess I will never know, because you can bet I won't be testing it out for myself. Coming in at number 4, the Conjuring Mirror. Despite what the name would have you believe, the Conjuring Mirror actually has really nothing to do with the Conjuring movies. Instead, this haunted mirror gets its name from the fact that it was, at one point, allegedly used to summon or conjure spirits. Once in the possession of a man named Stephen Zellner, legend has it that Stephen practiced a kind of witchcraft known as catoprotromancy, I probably butchered that, in order to see into the future and seek out revenge on his enemies. However, the more that Stephen used the mirror, the more and more corrupt he and his use of the magic became. Eventually, it's said the evil spirits he had conjured to do his bidding became too powerful to control and turned on the very person who had summoned them. Soon, Stephen began fearing for his life, so as a last resort, he decided to reach out to a local priest to see if the evil spirits could be exorcised from the home. But instead, the priest put him in touch with Ed and Lorraine. Upon their arrival at Stephen's home, they immediately knew Stephen was in grave trouble. And so to keep him safe, they performed a reverse incantation spell to seal up all the spirits back inside the mirror from which they had been conjured. Afterwards, Stephen begged them to take the mirror away from him, and that is how it came to live in Ed and Lorraine's museum. However, don't get too comfortable. Despite the spell they cast, Ed and Lorraine still claim to have experienced many terrifying moments with the spirits they angered from trapping inside this mirror. And who knows what could bring them back out. Coming in at number 3, the Shadow Doll. When it comes to creepy dolls, I'll be honest, it doesn't take much to freak me out. But with that being said, there is definitely a very good reason why the Shadow Doll is one of the most feared possessions in the entire museum. Now, what starts off this seemingly endless list of creepy things about this doll is that there is no definitive answer as to why it was created or who created it. But according to Ed and Lorraine's files, it was made using both human and animal bones and was absolutely used in satanic rituals. So it is definitely possessed by some less than ideal company. Said to have been found in an antique shop by a couple, they began to think something was wrong after they kept waking up night after night covered in inexplicable scratches. But it wasn't until the doll began showing up in their nightmares, telling them that she was going to kill them, that they decided to get rid of the terrifying toy. And good thing they did too. Legend has it that if someone takes a picture of this doll, she will visit you in your dreams and kill you in your sleep. Just one more reason to never trust a creepy doll. Coming in at number 2, a satanic idol. As the story goes, in 1991, a hunter was walking through the woods on the lookout for deer when he began to feel an overwhelming sense of paranoia, like he was being watched or something. At that very moment, he turned around to see this creepy doll leaned up against a tree, staring at him, and he could have sworn that it appeared out of nowhere. Immediately, the hunter knew he should not be here, and so he began walking as quickly as he could to find a way out of the forest. Then, suddenly, an old man dressed in all black robes appeared beside him. He looked like a priest, the hunter thought, but something wasn't quite right. Every step he took, the priest matched him, and eventually he became so freaked out, he actually debated shooting at the priest with his arrow to scare him off. But instead, he decided to ask the priest how to get out of the forest. But creepily, the priest did not speak. Instead, he pointed off into another direction, turned around, and left the man alone once again. Now, luckily, the hunter escaped, and the following day, after telling his friends the strange events, they suggested that he reach out to Ed and Lorraine. Upon telling them his story, they explained that the priest was a well-known leader of a satanic cult, and that the creepy doll he had encountered was actually an idol used for ritual purposes. However, the Warrens, being who they were, wanted to get this idol for the museum, and so Ed ventured into the forest, found the doll, and brought it back home. Soon after, however, strange things began happening. Allegedly, one time Ed was speaking with Lorraine, turned away for a second, looked back, and she was suddenly 30 feet away and passed out on the ground. He called the ambulance, and she spent the next 3 days in hospital in and out of consciousness. And according to Ed, she actually levitated while in the hospital. The Warrens always firmly believed that the satanic priest was working through the doll Ed had taken from the forest and was trying to punish them for taking it. Let's just hope no one was ever hospitalized after that. And last up in our number 1 spot, Annabelle. You didn't really think I was gonna do a list about haunted things found in Ed and Lorraine's museum and not bring up the famous Annabelle, did you? Although nowadays she is locked up tight, this wasn't always the case. Back in 1970, Annabelle was gifted to a nursing student named Donna. But it didn't take long before Donna and her roommate Angie knew that something was off. After about a month, the roommates began finding disturbing messages lying around their apartment, warning them to help Lou. Lou was one of their friends who had apparently warned the girls of the doll since day 1. Eventually, things got so creepy that the woman contacted a medium who told them not to be afraid, that the doll was merely possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died on the property years prior. The medium advised them that Annabelle felt safe here and would like to stay, so they agreed. But that was all a part of the demon's plan. Not long after, Lou stayed over, and when he awoke from a nightmare, he found he couldn't move his body. And then, like straight out of a horror movie, he says Annabelle walked up his body and strangled him until he passed out. After that, the girls contacted a priest who put them in touch with paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who discredited the medium and said it was, in fact, a very dangerous demon possessing this doll. However, even now, despite being locked up, the doll should be deeply feared. It was reported once that a man who visited the museum mocked the doll and only a few days later died after losing control of his motorbike. So, yeah. She very well could be the most terrifying doll on the planet.
Starting us off at number 10 is the death van. During the mid to late 90s, Dr. Jack Kevorkian became a notorious figure after being convicted for second-degree homicide for his role in the voluntary euthanasia of over 130 patients. Through the trial, his reputation earned him the nickname Dr. Death, and he ended up being sentenced to 10 years for his deeds. Now, despite the negative narrative, the doctor always fought back, claiming to be aiding the terminally ill end their lives on their own terms, and had set up an old 1968 Volkswagen van to get the job done. Now, whether you believe he was innocent or not, the fact of the matter is that at least 130 people died in this van, so naturally it has developed quite the reputation as a haunted object. So much so that at one point in time it was being sold on eBay for nearly $4,000. However, nowadays you can find it at the eternally haunted Zach Baggins Museum, where the ghosts of those who died are said to wander the museum, spooking visitors at all hours of the day. Coming up next at number 9 is Wheelie. Some say it's a stuffed dog, while others say it looks more like a sheep, but either way, it's an old, creepy, haunted toy from the 19th century that can be found in the Prince Edward Island Museum in Canada. Nicknamed Wheelie due to the creaky wheels the stuffed animal sits on top of, this nearly 200-year-old toy was found lying inside the walls of the Yeo House while construction was underway. According to staff, the disfigured sheep dog toy was simply lying on the ground inside the walls, and so they decided to keep it and put it out on display for their visitors, which would be all well and fine, except for the fact that it very well may have been hidden in a wall for a reason. Apparently, Wheelie is known to wander around all by himself, and is often found hiding in a different spot than where he was left the night before, which, if horror movies have taught me anything, is never a good sign. Coming in at number 8, hair. Now, I will admit this is not a single object that can be found in a haunted museum,
but it is definitely an exhibit that will make your skin crawl. Inside the Avanos Hair Museum in Turkey, yes, you heard that right, is literally a floor-to-ceiling cave-like room with countless little snippets of hair surrounding you at every angle. In fact, to be exact, there are 16,000 different hair samples adorning the walls. I'm sure you're wondering how such a museum began in the first place. Well, the common folklore is that a local potter once asked a dying friend to leave him a snippet of her hair to remember her by. The friend obliged and cut a small piece of her locks for the potter. From there, the potter placed the gift in his shop, and apparently this inspired visitors who began following in her footsteps and gifting locks to be displayed in his shop along with the original, until eventually the shop was overrun by hair. And don't worry, if you want in on the fun, or creepiness depending on your feeling about hair, guests are encouraged to leave behind a little sample themselves. Just ask the staff for some scissors and your wishes will be granted. Coming in at number 7, the Dark Mirror. Found in the Museum of the Paranormal and Occult, this dark mirror is said to show you much more than you will ever want to see. The Mobile Museum obtained this cursed mirror from the original owner, who claimed to have purchased it while attending a psychic fair in the Columbus area. Now, there are lots of alleged cursed mirrors out there, some said to be haunted by demons who escape in the night, torturing whoever possesses the cursed glass, which, don't get me wrong, is definitely terrifying. However, this particular object has more of an eerie, foreboding quality that is sure to send anyone who looks into it into a spiral. According to the museum, those that dare gaze into the cursed mirror claim to be struck with very upsetting visions. Some even reported ghastly sightings, such as their own corpse staring back at them. Coming in at number 6 is Einstein's brain. In the famous Medical Mutter Museum in Philadelphia is none other than the brain of world-famous theoretical physicist Albert Einstein, or at least parts of it are there. And almost as peculiar as having sections of his brain preserved in glass slides and displayed is the story of how the genius brain wound up at the museum in the first place. Apparently, after he died in 1955, pathologist Thomas Harvey was the one to perform his autopsy. But unbeknownst to the family, he decided to remove Einstein's brain for preservation in the hopes that scientists of the future could study it to determine what made Einstein so intelligent. Eventually, after much reluctance, Einstein's son agreed to allow the brain to be kept under one very strict condition, that it be used for scientific research. Now, with permission from his next of kin, Harvey went forward, slicing the brain into 240 pieces, making sure to preserve each piece very carefully. Over the next few decades, Harvey would send bits and pieces to researchers upon request, and eventually donated the rest to this very museum it resides in today. Coming in at number 5 is Annabelle. Okay, I know we're all pretty aware of the cursed demon doll, but I just couldn't help it. I mean, she is one of the most terrifying things you can find in a museum after all. Although nowadays she's locked up tight in the famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren's Occult Museum, this wasn't always the case. Back in 1970, Annabelle was gifted to a nursing student named Donna, but it didn't take long before Donna and her roommate Angie knew that something was off. After about a month, the roommates began finding disturbing messages lying around their apartment, warning them to help Lou. Lou was one of their friends who had apparently warned the girls of the doll since day one. Eventually, things got so creepy that the women contacted a medium who told them to not be afraid, that the doll was merely possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died on the property years prior. The medium advised them that Annabelle felt really safe here and would like to stay, so they agreed. But that was all part of the demon's plan. Not long after, Lou stayed over, and when he awoke from a nightmare, he found he couldn't move his body. And then, like straight out of a horror movie, he says Annabelle walked up his body and strangled him until he passed out. After that, the girls contacted a priest who put them in touch with the paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who discredited the medium and said it was, in fact, a dangerous demon possessing the doll. However, even now, despite being locked up, the doll should be deeply feared. It was reported one man who visited the museum mocked the doll and only a few days later died after losing control of his motorbike. Next up at number 4, The Hands Resist Him painting. As far as paintings go, The Hands Resist Him, created by William Stoneham in 1972, is probably considered one of the most haunted pieces in the whole world. Stoneham claims the inspiration for the piece came from an old photograph from his early years, and somehow, over time, the painting landed in the hands of a California couple. As the story goes, the sellers who auctioned it on eBay in 2000 kept the painting in their 4-year-old's room. But one morning, the girl claimed that the people in the painting were not letting her sleep at night. So, for the girl's peace of mind, they set up a motion sensor camera to prove that no monsters were coming out of the painting. However, to their surprise, they captured some truly frightening activity. They awoke to find photos of the boy crawling from the painting, and others where the doll's face had changed to a very angry disposition while holding a weapon. Not only that, it's also rumored to have been responsible for the death of 3 men who came into contact with it at one time or another. Today, you can find it in the back room of Smith's Perception Fine Art Gallery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But be warned, those that witness the painting often complain of nausea or extreme physical pain while in its presence. Coming in at number 3, Ed Gein's Cauldron. So, a little backstory. Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield, was a killer and body snatcher between 1947 to 1957. Gein grew up very religious. His mother was a devout Lutheran who taught her sons that women were inherently promiscuous and instruments of the devil. Gein became very attached to his mother, arguably a little too much, and after his father and brother both died, Gein became his mother's primary caregiver. However, after she died in 1945, something snapped and he became a totally different person. He began to visit the graveyards at night, digging up middle-aged women that had similarities to his deceased mother, before bringing the bodies home and mutilating them, using their skin to make covers for his furniture, masks out of their faces, or using the bones for decoration and dishes. Even creepier was when he began creating an entire woman's suit from various different exhumed bodies, as he wanted to be able to become his mother and literally be in her skin. It is believed that this cauldron was used by Gein to not only store the stolen body parts, but primarily to boil them so that the skin could be removed from the bone more easily. Nowadays, this cursed cauldron is found at the haunted Zach Baggin Museum and is definitely one of the most terrifying things found inside. Next up at number 2, Peter Curtin's head. Inside the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Wisconsin is one of the most haunting objects you could come across: the severed head of a dead man. But who's the guy? Well, none other than the vampire of Dusseldorf, Peter Curtin. To give you a bit of context, Peter Curtin is widely considered one of the most cruel, sick, and deranged men of the 20th century. Between 1913 to 1929, he was a rampant killer and predator, responsible for the death of 10 people, on top of another 31 attempted killings among his 68 crimes total. While in court, he received the nickname Vampire of Dusseldorf for reasons I'm sure you can imagine, and after freely confessing to all his crimes with no remorse for his cruelties, he was sentenced to execution via the guillotine. But his atrocities did not end there. In fact, shortly before he was executed, he famously turned to his psychiatrist and asked, quote, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck that would be the pleasure to end all pleasures. Following his beheading, his head was then bisected and his brain was removed in order to be studied. The rest of his head, however, was mummified, transferred to the United States, and put on display for the world to see. And last up today in the number 1 spot, Nabrok. In 17th century Iceland, there was a well-known witchcraft ritual where people would create pants out of the skin of the deceased in hopes of a better life for them and their families moving forward. Called Nabrok, meaning corpse breeches, or more commonly referred to as necropants nowadays, the pants were made as a talisman to magically summon more money for whoever made them. However, there was a catch. The man in question had to have consented before death, and the deed could only be done after the burial had taken place. Once loved ones said their goodbyes, you were free to dig up the corpses and peel off the skin, being careful to keep it all in one piece. It was believed that no holes or tears could occur, otherwise the power of the necropants would be lost. But disgustingly, it didn't stop there. Once you had fashioned the pants and put them on your person, the ritual demanded you head out into the village and steal 1 coin from a destitute widow. From there, the coin was to be placed in the groin of the pants, along with a traditional Icelandic sigil for the ritual to be complete. There is only one known pair of such pants remaining today, and it's held in the Museum of Icelandic Sorcery and Witchcraft. And if you ask me, they are just about the most terrifying thing that I can think of.